Her name was Dorothy. In 1979, 8 months after burying her husband of 53 years, she did something her granddaughter still cannot fully explain. She got up, she made breakfast, she went to church, she never once said the word depressed, never opened a grief journal, never sat across from a counselor explaining her feelings to a stranger taking notes. Today, the grief therapy industry is worth over $6 billion. Dorothy buried two people she loved most in this world, her mother in 1962, her husband in 1979, and never spent a single dollar doing it. Her granddaughter found something strange while clearing out the house, not a journal, not a self-help book, a small, ordinary calendar with specific days marked for specific tasks, starting the week after each funeral. Dorothy had never called it a grief process. She called it getting through the week. What Dorothy had were 10 habits so ordinary she never once described them as coping. She would have been confused by the word. Nobody on her street called them anything either, because every widow on that street eventually had them. She had no grief counselor charging $200 an hour to help her process, no app prompting her to journal her emotions each night, no 5-stage model she was taught to expect and measure herself against, no support group meeting every Tuesday to discuss her feelings with strangers who had also lost someone. What she had were 10 habits. The habits were the part nobody sold her, because the habits were the part that actually worked. Then something changed, not human grief itself, not what a person actually needs after losing someone they loved for half a century. What changed is exactly what this video is about. Before number 10, subscribe. This channel exists to tell you exactly this kind of story, every week. Dorothy kept her hands busy from the first morning. The day after her husband's funeral, she did not sit in a quiet house. She baked bread, she mended a torn shirt, she swept a porch that did not need sweeping. This was not avoidance, it was structural. Idle hands, in Dorothy's understanding, gave grief room to spread unchecked through every hour of the day. Occupational therapists studying bereavement have found that structured physical tasks during acute grief measurably reduce rumination, the repetitive, intrusive replaying of loss that often deepens depression, by giving the mind a concrete, immediate focus. Dorothy never read that research. Her mother had simply told her, idle hands and a grieving mind make poor company for each other. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 9. Dorothy let herself cry on a schedule, not whenever it struck. Each evening, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet, she allowed herself 15 or 20 minutes alone in her bedroom. She cried, if she needed to. Then she came back out. She did not suppress the grief. She contained it to a window she could survive. Grief researchers call this bounded mourning and have found that people who schedule deliberate time for grief expression rather than either avoiding it entirely or letting it intrude constantly report significantly better long-term emotional regulation than either extreme. Dorothy's mother had taught her this without a name for it. Grieve hard for 20 minutes, then go feed your children. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. We are not far from number 1. The habit and entire grief industry was eventually built to make you forget you already had. Stay with me. Number 8. Dorothy let her neighbors feed her, without protest, for 2 full weeks. When her husband died, food began arriving the same afternoon. Dorothy did not insist she was fine. She did not refuse out of pride. She accepted every dish, ate what was brought, and let the practical burden of cooking disappear for 14 days. A 2018 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that accepting tangible support during acute grief, rather than insisting on self-sufficiency, is strongly associated with better psychological outcomes in the following year, because it conserves emotional resources for the grief itself rather than logistics. The modern meal delivery and grief care package industry now sells, at a markup, exactly what Dorothy's street gave her for free out of plain instinct. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 7. Dorothy talked about her husband using his name, not euphemisms. She did not say my loss or what happened. She said Walter. She told stories about him at dinner, by name, often, without warning, sometimes laughing in the middle of them. Grief counselors today often teach this explicitly, using the deceased's name rather than avoiding it, as a technique to normalize ongoing connection rather than enforced forgetting. Dorothy did not need to be taught. She simply never stopped talking about Walter the way you talk about someone who is still, in every way that matters to a family's memory, present. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 6. Dorothy returned to her regular church pew the very next Sunday. She did not wait until she felt ready. She sat in the same seat, sang the same hymns, and let the structure of an ordinary Sunday hold her up before her feelings caught up to the act of showing up. Behavioral researchers have identified this as structure before feeling, engaging in normal routines deliberately ahead of emotional readiness, which has been shown to accelerate emotional recovery rather than force it prematurely. Dorothy's mother had told her once, "Showing up is not the same as feeling fine, and you do not need to feel fine to show up." Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Dorothy sonum proim ampili. We are almost at number 1, the single habit the entire modern grief industry was built around replacing. Almost there. Number 5. Dorothy kept one photograph of her husband visible, and only one. Not an entire wall of memorial photographs, not a shrine. One photograph, on the mantel, that she looked at every day, briefly, on her way past. Grief researchers studying continuing bonds, the ongoing relationship the living maintain with the dead, have found that small, consistent rituals of remembrance support healthier long-term adjustment than either total avoidance of reminders or environments saturated with them. Dorothy's one photograph let Walter remain present without the house becoming a museum to her loss. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 4. Number 4. Number 4. Mono. Number 4. Dorothy gave herself permission to laugh within days of the funeral, without guilt. At the gathering after Walter's service, she laughed, genuinely, loudly, at a story her brother-in-law told. She did not apologize for it. She did not feel she had betrayed her grief by feeling, briefly, joy. A study published in the journal Death Studies found that the capacity for positive emotion during acute bereavement, far from indicating insufficient love, is one of the strongest predictors of resilient long-term grief adjustment. Dorothy's generation had no guilt attached to this. Laughter and grief, in her house, were never treated as opposites. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 3. Dorothy made one decision at a time and postponed the rest. In the months after Walter died, she did not sell the house, change her routine, or make any major decision she didn't have to make immediately. She handled what needed handling that week and explicitly set the rest aside. Financial and grief counselors today often advise bereaved clients not to make major life decisions within the first year, advice that exists precisely because Dorothy's instinctive caution is no longer instinctive for most people. Dorothy's mother had told her, "Grief is not the time to decide anything you don't have to decide today." Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 2. Dorothy let her children see her cry, exactly once, and then let them see her continue functioning. She did not hide her grief entirely, performing strength that wasn't real. She also did not collapse in front of them repeatedly. She showed them both things were true at once. This hurts, and we will still have dinner tonight. Family researchers have found that children of grieving parents fare best when they witness authentic but bounded grief, proof that pain is real and survivable, rather than either hidden completely or allowed to overwhelm the household. Dorothy's children grew up believing both of those things could be true at the same time, because their mother showed them exactly that. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 1. Dorothy believed grief was something you carried while living, not something you resolved before continuing. This is the one the entire grief industry cannot package, because it isn't a stage or a technique. It's a belief about what healing actually requires. Dorothy did not believe she needed to process Walter's death to some completed state before her life could resume. She believed the two simply happened together, the carrying and the continuing, side by side, for the rest of her own life. She never stopped missing him. She also never stopped living. She did not see those as contradictions to be resolved. She never had a counselor explain the stages of grief to her. She never had a book tell her where she should be by month 6. She had a mother who told her once, "You don't get over it. You get on with it, carrying it." The modern grief industry, built around the premise that grief is a problem to be resolved through the right process, sells closure. Dorothy's 53 years of marriage, and the 17 years she lived afterward without him, suggest closure was never the actual goal. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Dorothy passed away in 1996, 17 years after Walter. Her family found that small calendar in a kitchen drawer, the specific tasks for the weeks after each funeral still faintly legible in her handwriting. Nobody at her funeral mentioned a 5-stage model. They mentioned the bread she baked the day after Walter died, the one photograph on the mantel, the way she said his name, often, for the rest of her life without flinching. 10 habits Dorothy never named, never wrote in a book, and never once thought to call a grief process. She simply called it, getting through it. What changed between how Dorothy grieved and how grief is handled today was not what a human being actually needs after losing someone they love. Those needs have not changed since 1962 or since 1979. What changed was who got paid when that need was repackaged into stages, sessions, and a $6 billion industry built on the promise of closure. Pick one thing from this list. Come back in the comments in a week and tell me what it did. If you've lost someone the way Dorothy did and found your own way through it, tell me below. I read every single comment. The next video is already waiting.